In the vast archives of the eternal conclave, there exists a classification reserved for moments that reshape the fabric of galactic understanding. We call them resonance events, instances where the fundamental assumptions upon which civilizations are built prove to be catastrophically, irreversibly wrong. In 17,000 years of recorded history, the conclave had documented only 4 such events.
The 5th arrived in the form of a single transmission from a species we had unanimously agreed would never matter. I am Velara Kos, keeper of silent records for the eternal conclave, and I have spent the past 40 years attempting to understand how we failed so completely to see what was coming. This is not a tale of warfare, though war plays its part. It is not a tale of conquest, though empires fell and rose in its telling. It is a tale of expectation, of the certainties we constructed from our assumptions, and of the species that shattered every one of them simply by refusing to be what we believed they were. We expected silence from humanity,
They answered,
and nothing in the galaxy would ever be the same.
The eternal conclave had observed the emergence of humanity with the detached interest one might afford a curious specimen, noteworthy enough to catalogue, insignificant enough to dismiss. They had achieved sentience approximately 200,000 years ago, a span of time that most elder species would consider barely sufficient for developing basic tool use. Yet somehow, through mechanisms we did not understand and did not care to investigate, they had progressed from stone implements to interstellar travel in what amounted to a cosmic eye blink.
They are accelerated, Archon Theleth had declared during the conclave's initial assessment of humanity, 6 centuries before the events I now chronicle. Dangerously so. Species that develop at such rates typically burn out within a few thousand years. They lack the gradual wisdom that comes from measured evolution. They are all fire and no foundation.
The assembled keepers had murmured their agreement. I was young then, barely 3,000 cycles into my tenure, but even I recognized the patterns Theleth described. Rapid development species were unstable. They expanded too quickly, consumed resources too greedily, collapsed too completely. The galaxy was littered with the remnants of civilizations that had blazed bright and died young.
Humanity, we concluded, would be no different.
We assigned them a monitoring classification of tertiary significance, watched but not engaged, documented but not considered. They were confined to a small region of the galactic arm that contained nothing of particular value, surrounded by buffer zones that would contain whatever chaos their inevitable collapse might produce. And then we forgot about them. For 600 years, humanity remained a footnote in our archives, a curiosity occasionally referenced in academic discussions about developmental acceleration, but never seriously considered as a factor in galactic affairs. They expanded slowly within their designated region, built colonies on worlds we had deemed marginal, developed technologies that lagged centuries behind even the youngest conclave members.
They were, by every metric we employed, exactly what we expected them to be, a young species struggling to find their footing in a universe far larger and more complex than they could comprehend.
We did not realize that they were also watching us. The first indication that something had fundamentally changed came not from humanity itself, but from the Kethvari Dominion, one of the Conclave's most powerful member civilizations, controllers of over 800 systems and commanders of a military force that had not been seriously challenged in 9,000 years. The Kethvari had been expanding their territory along the border of human-occupied space, claiming systems that fell within the buffer zones we had established. This was technically a violation of conclave protocols, but the Kethvari were powerful enough that such violations were typically overlooked. The buffer zones existed to contain humanity, after all, not to protect them. The first reports arrived at the conclave through standard diplomatic channels. A Kethvari mining colony had gone silent. Not destroyed. There was no debris, no distress signal, no evidence of conflict. The colony had simply ceased responding to communications. When a patrol vessel was dispatched to investigate, it found the colony intact but completely empty. 40,000 Kethvari had vanished without a trace. The Dominion's response was predictable. They dispatched a full battle group, 12 warships and support vessels, to secure the area and investigate the disappearances. Standard protocols for dealing with unknown threats in contested territory.
The battle group vanished as well.
I was present in the conclave chamber when the Kethvari ambassador delivered this news. Ambassador Voreth was typically composed. The Kethvari prided themselves on emotional control, but I could see the tremor in his cranial ridges that betrayed his distress. 12 warships, he said, his voice carefully modulated but carrying an undercurrent of something I had rarely heard from a Kethvari: fear. Commanded by Admiral Kethvor, one of our most experienced fleet commanders. They entered the system, transmitted standard arrival protocols, and then nothing. No distress signals, no combat telemetry, no debris field. They simply ceased to exist.
What forces were present in the system? Archon Felith asked, his ancient form settling deeper into the crystalline matrix that sustained his consciousness. What could possibly have overwhelmed a Kethvari battle group so completely that no warning was transmitted?
We detected no hostile forces, Voreth replied, and now the fear was unmistakable. Our long-range sensors showed the system as empty except for the original colony. There were no enemy vessels, no weapons platforms, no defensive installations of any kind. And yet, 12 warships with a combined crew of 8,000 simply disappeared. The chamber fell silent. Such a thing was unprecedented in the Conclave's recorded history. Warships did not vanish without trace. Battles left evidence, debris, radiation signatures, emergency transmissions. Whatever had happened to the Kethvari vessels had happened so quickly, so completely, that not a single crew member had been able to send a final message.
The system in question, I said, speaking for the first time, lies within the buffer zone surrounding human-occupied space. Have the humans been contacted regarding these events?
Voreth's expression shifted to something I did not immediately recognize. It took me a moment to identify it as contempt mixed with uncertainty.
The humans have been contacted, he said slowly. They expressed sympathy for our losses. They claimed to have no knowledge of what occurred. They offered to assist with the investigation.
And you believe them? I believe they are incapable of doing what was done to our ships. Their technology is centuries behind ours. Their military forces are negligible by any meaningful standard. They could not have destroyed a Kethvari battle group any more than a child could defeat a trained warrior. And yet you are here, I observed, seeking the Conclave's assistance, which suggests you are not entirely certain of that assessment. Voreth's cranial ridges flattened, a Kethvari expression of anger. I am here because something destroyed our vessels and killed our people. I am here because the conclave is supposed to maintain order in this galaxy. I am here because we need answers, and we need them before more of our people die."
Archon Thelith raised one withered appendage, his ancient eyes gleaming with calculation. "The conclave will investigate. We will dispatch observers to the affected region. We will determine what occurred and who is responsible. In the meantime, Ambassador, I would counsel patience. Whatever threatens your people, we will identify and neutralize it."
"And if it is the humans?" Thelith's response carried the weight of 17,000 years of accumulated certainty. "Then they will be dealt with accordingly. No species defies the conclave and survives to repeat the offense." I was selected as one of the observers dispatched to the border region, a recognition of my expertise in cataloging first contact scenarios and my reputation for meticulous documentation. I departed the conclave's central world aboard the observation vessel Quiet Witness, accompanied by 2 other keepers and a small security contingent. By every measure I could apply, they were exactly what the conclave had always believed them to be: a young, chaotic species with potential but no particular significance. Their history was marked by violence and instability. Their technology was derivative and unimpressive. Their position in the galactic community was marginal at best. And yet, there was something in their records that I could not quite articulate, a pattern that emerged only when I considered their history as a whole rather than examining individual events. They had faced extinction-level challenges repeatedly throughout their existence: ice ages, asteroid impacts, pandemics, resource wars that had brought them to the brink of self-annihilation. Each time, by all logical analysis, they should have collapsed. Each time, somehow, they had survived. Not just survived, adapted, grown stronger, emerged from each crisis more capable than before. I made note of this observation in my personal files, but did not share it with my colleagues. It seemed too speculative, too dependent on interpretation rather than data. The conclave valued objectivity above all things, suggesting that a tertiary species might possess some form of unusual resilience would be seen as imaginative rather than analytical. So I kept my observations to myself, and I continued to study the archives, searching for something I could not yet name. We arrived at the border region to find chaos. In the 17 days since the conclave's initial assessment, the situation had deteriorated catastrophically. 3 more Kethvari systems had gone silent. A response fleet of 40 vessels had been dispatched to secure the region, and had vanished just as completely as the first battle group. The Dominion had lost nearly 20,000 personnel and over 50 warships without a single confirmed sighting of the enemy responsible. The Kethvari were no longer merely concerned, they were terrified. The recording that played was fragmentary, corrupted, barely comprehensible, but what I could make out was deeply unsettling. "Contact with unknown vessels. Repeat, we have contact with... They're not responding to hails. Weapon systems are... Emperor, protect us. They're everywhere." And then, silence. Complete, absolute silence. "Can you enhance the transmission?" I asked. "Identify the unknown vessels?" "Negative, Keeper. The transmission degrades beyond recovery point before any vessel identification is possible. However, based on the Admiral's reaction, the vessels were numerous, significantly more numerous than expected."
Estimated count?
Unknown. The phrase, "they're everywhere," suggests a quantity that overwhelmed standard tactical assessment. Hundreds, perhaps, possibly more.
I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the vessel's climate systems. The Kethvari response fleet had been 40 warships, enough firepower to devastate a planet, enough force to overwhelm any known threat in the region. If they had been confronted by hundreds of enemy vessels, those vessels had to have come from somewhere. They had to belong to someone. And the only civilization in this region of space, besides the Kethvari themselves, was humanity.
Set course for the primary human world in this sector, I instructed. I wish to speak with their representatives directly.
The human station orbiting their colony world was underwhelming. I had expected something that at least attempted to project power, defensive installations, military vessels, the trappings of a civilization aware that it bordered a potential threat. Instead, I found a modest orbital platform that appeared to serve primarily commercial functions, surrounded by a handful of civilian transports and what might charitably be called patrol craft. "Keeper Koss," the communications system announced. "We are receiving a hail from the human station. They welcome us to the Meridian system and request permission to provide approach guidance."
"Grant permission," I said, studying the station through the observation ports, "and request a meeting with their senior representative."
The approach was smooth, unremarkable. The human station grew larger in our viewports, its surface marked by the utilitarian architecture that seemed to characterize everything humans built: functional, efficient, entirely devoid of aesthetic pretension. When we docked, I was greeted by a delegation of 3 humans in simple gray uniforms, led by a woman whose dark skin and silver-streaked hair suggested advanced age by human biological standards. "Keeper Koss," she said, extending her hand in the human gesture of greeting. "I'm Governor Elena Vasquez. Welcome to Meridian Station. We've been expecting you." I accepted the greeting, noting the strength in her grip and the steadiness of her gaze. "You were expecting me?" "The Conclave doesn't dispatch observers without reason. Given recent events in Kethvari space, we assumed someone would eventually want to ask us questions." She smiled, but there was something unreadable in her eyes. "We're happy to cooperate fully with your investigation."
"You are aware of the events in Kethvari space?"
"We're aware that they've lost ships, quite a few ships, from what our sensors have detected. We've offered to assist, but they haven't been particularly receptive to help from—" She paused, choosing her words carefully. "From species they consider beneath their notice."
"And are you beneath their notice, Governor?"
The smile remained, but something shifted behind it. "We're exactly what we've always been, Keeper. A young species trying to find our place in a very old galaxy. Nothing more, nothing less." I studied her face, searching for deception, for hidden meaning, for any indication that her words did not reflect truth. I found nothing, only calm, patient certainty that gave nothing away.
"May I ask you some questions, Governor, about the disappearances?"
"Of course. That's why you're here, isn't it?" She gestured toward the interior of the station. "Please, walk with me. We can talk along the way." The station's interior matched its exterior, functional, unadorned, quietly efficient. Humans moved through the corridors with purpose, nodding respectfully as we passed, but showing no particular curiosity about my presence. I noticed that despite the apparent civilian nature of the facility, many of the personnel moved with the disciplined precision of military training. "The Kethvari believe you may be responsible for the attacks on their vessels," I said, deciding on directness.
Governor Vasquez did not seem surprised. The Kethvari believe many things about us. Most of them aren't particularly flattering.
That doesn't answer my question.
No, it doesn't. She stopped at a viewport that looked out over the planet below, a world of blue oceans and green continents, achingly beautiful in the harsh light of space. Keeper, let me ask you something. In all your years of observing species, cataloging their development, assessing their significance, have you ever encountered a civilization that simply wanted to be left alone?
Many species value isolation, I acknowledged. It is not uncommon.
But they're not left alone, are they? The Kethvari expanded into our buffer zone. They established colonies on worlds within systems we were told would remain neutral. They pushed closer to our borders with every passing decade, and when we raised concerns through diplomatic channels, we were told that species of our classification had no standing to object.
The buffer zones were established for your protection.
The buffer zones were established to contain us, she interrupted, her voice still calm but carrying an edge of something harder beneath. To keep us in a box until you decided what to do with us. We understood that. We accepted it for a while.
And now?
Now the Kethvari are learning that boxes have walls, and sometimes, when you push against those walls hard enough, you discover what's on the other side.
I felt the implications of her words settle over me like a cold shroud. Are you saying humanity is responsible for the attacks?
I'm saying that consequences exist, Keeper. For every action, there is a reaction. The Kethvari chose to expand into territory they were warned to avoid. What happens in that territory is not our responsibility.
Thousands have died. Warships have been destroyed without warning, without provocation.
Without provocation? For the first time, genuine emotion flickered across her features. Anger, tightly controlled but unmistakable. The Kethvari established a mining colony on a world in the buffer zone, a world that was already inhabited.
Inhabited? There were no indigenous species recorded in that system?
Not indigenous, colonized by us. She turned to face me directly, and I saw something in her eyes that I had never seen in any human before, a depth of resolve that transcended mere determination. 347,000 people, Keeper, men, women, children, scientists, farmers, teachers, artists. They built a community on that world over 2 generations. They called it New Harmony.
My blood ran cold. The colony that went silent, the Kethvari colonists who disappeared, were attempting to establish themselves on a world that was already occupied. When our people refused to leave, the Kethvari decided to remove them by force. They expected silence from us, the same silence we've always offered when stronger species pushed us aside. Her voice dropped to barely a whisper. They didn't get silence.
What happened to the Kethvari colonists?
They were given the same choice they gave our people: leave or face the consequences. Unlike our people, they were allowed to choose. They chose wrong.
I struggled to process what I was hearing. The implications were staggering. Not just the revelation that humanity had somehow developed the capability to destroy Kethvari forces, but the deeper truth that they had been building that capability in secret, hidden from conclave observation, for what must have been decades or centuries.
How? I asked. How did you develop such capabilities without our knowledge? The Conclave has monitored your development for 600 years.
The Conclave monitored what we wanted them to see. Governor Vasquez smiled again, and this time there was no warmth in it at all. You expected silence from us, Keeper. You expected us to be exactly what your classifications said we were. Young, weak, insignificant. So that's what we showed you. And while you watched our public development, our official progress, our visible civilization, we built something else. Something you never thought to look for, because you never believed we were capable of it.
What did you build?
An answer to every species that has ever looked at humanity and seen prey, to every civilization that has pushed us aside and expected us to accept it quietly, to every assumption that young means weak and old means wise. She stepped closer, and despite her small stature, I found myself fighting an urge to retreat. We built an answer, Keeper, and the Kethvari were the first to hear it. I left the human station in a state of profound disorientation. Everything I had believed about humanity, everything the Conclave had believed, was being systematically dismantled by evidence I could not deny. The young, chaotic species we had dismissed as inconsequential had somehow developed capabilities that exceeded our most advanced member civilizations. They had hidden this development from 17,000 years of accumulated observational expertise.
And now they were demonstrating their capabilities in the most direct way possible, by annihilating anyone who threatened them. The Kethvari response to my initial report was predictable. Denial, followed by outrage, followed by demands for immediate military action. A full battle fleet was assembled, 200 warships representing the core of the Dominion's military power, with orders to proceed to the border region and pacify the human threat by any means necessary. I transmitted urgent warnings to the Conclave, arguing that such action was premature, that we did not yet understand the full extent of human capabilities, that launching an assault based on incomplete information could lead to catastrophe. I was overruled. The Kethvari have the right to defend their territory and avenge their dead, Archon Thelith declared in his response. Humanity has revealed themselves as a threat that must be contained. If they will not accept Conclave authority voluntarily, they will be made to accept it through force. This is the way of the galaxy. This is how order is maintained. I read his words and felt something I had not experienced in 3,000 years of service to the Conclave. Doubt. Not doubt in the Archon's authority, but doubt in his wisdom. Doubt in the certainties upon which our entire civilization was built. The humans had hidden their true capabilities from us for centuries. They had built weapons capable of destroying the most powerful warships in the galaxy. They had done all of this while appearing to be exactly what we expected them to be. What else had they hidden? What else had we failed to see? I requested permission to return to the human station to attempt diplomatic resolution before military action commenced. Permission was denied. Instead, I was ordered to accompany the Kethvari fleet as an observer to document the campaign that would restore order to the border region and remind humanity of their place in the galactic hierarchy. I obeyed, because that is what keepers do. But as the fleet assembled and prepared to depart, I could not shake the feeling that we were making a terrible mistake. The Kethvari fleet was magnificent by any standard, 200 warships of varying classes, from swift destroyers to massive dreadnoughts, each vessel representing the pinnacle of Dominion engineering. Admiral Kethvan, who commanded the fleet, was a veteran of 17 campaigns, a strategist of legendary skill, a warrior who had never known defeat. The humans will learn what it means to challenge the Dominion, he declared as the fleet entered formation.
They destroyed a battle group through treachery and surprise. Now they face the full might of our civilization. There will be no surprises this time. There will be no mercy."
I said nothing. I had already transmitted my assessment to the conclave that this campaign was ill-advised, that we were proceeding without adequate intelligence, that the humans had demonstrated capabilities we did not yet understand. My concerns had been noted and dismissed. There was nothing more I could do but observe and document.
The fleet crossed into the buffer zone on the 17th day. Long-range sensors detected no opposition, no defensive installations, no enemy vessels, no indication that humanity was aware of our approach or prepared to resist it.
They are hiding, Admiral Kethvan assessed, hoping we will pass them by. They know they cannot face us directly.
Or they are waiting, I suggested quietly, choosing their moment.
The Admiral's cranial ridges flattened with contempt. "You have spent too much time with humans, Keeper. They have infected you with their weakness. Watch and learn what strength truly means."
The fleet continued its advance, proceeding toward the Meridian System, the primary human colony in the region, home to Governor Vasquez and millions of human civilians. The Admiral's plan was simple and brutal: destroy the colony, demonstrate Dominion power, force humanity to surrender, or face systematic extermination.
It was the kind of plan that had worked for the Kethvari for 9,000 years. It was the kind of plan that assumed the enemy would behave as enemies had always behaved, fighting conventional battles, accepting inevitable defeat, surrendering before total annihilation. Humanity did not behave as expected. We were 3 hours from the Meridian System when the sensors began detecting anomalies. Ships, hundreds of them, appearing from locations throughout the region where no ships had been detected before. They emerged from asteroid fields, from the shadows of gas giants, from positions so perfectly concealed that our sensors had registered them as natural phenomena.
Within minutes, the fleet was surrounded.
"Impossible," Admiral Kethvan breathed as the tactical display filled with hostile signatures. There are thousands of them." I counted them as they emerged, my keeper's training compelling me to document even as my mind struggled to process what I was seeing. 3,000 vessels, 5,000, 8,000. Each wave that appeared revealed another wave behind it, an endless tide of ships that seemed to materialize from the very fabric of space itself. "How is this possible?" someone whispered behind me. "Where did they come from?" I thought of Governor Vasquez's words. We built an answer. And now I understood what she had meant. Not a single weapon or fleet, but an entire civilization reorganized around a single purpose: survival at any cost. Every resource, every innovation, every breakthrough they had achieved over centuries of apparent stagnation, all of it had been funneled into building this moment.
They had expected silence from us, she had said.
This was humanity's answer.
A transmission arrived on all channels, a human voice, calm and unhurried despite the magnitude of the moment.
Kethvari Fleet, this is Admiral James Okonkwo of the United Human Defense Force. You have entered sovereign human territory with hostile intent. You have threatened our people, our worlds, and our right to exist. We are prepared to offer you a choice that you did not offer our colonists on New Harmony. Withdraw now, and you will be permitted to leave peacefully. Continue your advance, and you will be destroyed.
Admiral Kethvan's response was immediate. Fire all weapons, target their command vessels, break their formation.
The Kethvari fleet opened fire, 200 warships unleashing their full destructive power in a concentrated barrage that should have devastated any opposing force. I watched the energy readings spike, saw the brilliant flares as weapons connected with targets, felt the deck shudder beneath me as our own vessel's batteries discharged. The human ships absorbed the assault without visible effect.
"That's not possible," the tactical officer reported, his voice cracking. "Their shields, our weapons are not penetrating their shields."
Increase power. Concentrate fire on a single target.
The fleet redirected its assault, focusing the combined firepower of 200 warships on a single human vessel, a cruiser-class ship that should have been reduced to vapor within seconds. The shields flickered, wavered, but held. And then, with terrible deliberation, the human fleet began to move.
They did not fire immediately. They closed the distance first, surrounding the Kethvari fleet with methodical precision, cutting off every avenue of retreat. Only when the trap was complete did they respond to our attack.
The destruction was absolute.
Human weapons tore through Kethvari's shields as if they did not exist. Warships that had dominated galactic battlefields for millennia were reduced to debris in seconds. The tactical display became a cascade of failing signatures, each one representing hundreds of lives extinguished in an instant.
Admiral Kethvan screamed orders that no one could follow, demanded actions that were no longer possible, refused to accept the reality unfolding around him. I watched in horrified silence as the fleet that was supposed to restore order to the galaxy was systematically erased from existence.
100 ships destroyed in the first 3 minutes, 150 in the first 5. By the 10-minute mark, only a handful of Kethvari vessels remained, damaged, crippled, incapable of further resistance.
The human admiral's voice returned to the communication channels. Kethvari survivors, your weapons are disabled and your fleet is destroyed. You will be permitted to withdraw with your wounded. Return to the conclave with a message. Humanity does not seek conflict. We do not desire conquest. We want only to live in peace, free from those who would test our resolve. But if we are threatened again, if any species attempts to do to us what you attempted today, the answer will be the same.
A pause, then softer. We expected you to underestimate us. We expected you to believe your own assumptions about our weakness, and we prepared accordingly. Do not make this mistake again. There will not be a third lesson.
I stood on the bridge of a crippled warship, surrounded by the dead and dying, watching as human vessels moved through the debris field with rescue operations that our own people were too devastated to perform. They pulled survivors from shattered hulls. They provided medical assistance to those who had been trying to kill them moments before. They treated their defeated enemies with a compassion that seemed utterly incompatible with the overwhelming violence they had just demonstrated. Admiral Kethvan was among the dead, killed when his command vessel was destroyed in the battle's opening moments. I found myself as the highest-ranking conclave official among the survivors, responsible for conveying the message that humanity had sent.
I returned to the eternal conclave carrying that message and a truth that would reshape galactic civilization.
The conclave's response to my report was chaos.
For 17,000 years, the assembled civilizations had operated under a fundamental assumption that age conferred wisdom, that power was earned through gradual accumulation, that young species were inherently inferior to those who had preceded them. Humanity's victory over the Kethvari shattered that assumption beyond repair.
"This changes everything," Archon Thelith admitted during the emergency session that followed my testimony. His ancient form seemed to have aged centuries in the hours since I had delivered my report. If humanity could develop such capabilities in secret, any species could. Our entire framework for assessing civilizational development is fundamentally flawed.
Not flawed, I corrected, surprising myself with my boldness. Arrogant. We saw what we expected to see because we never considered the possibility that we might be wrong. Humanity showed us exactly what we assumed they were: young, weak, insignificant, and we accepted that presentation without question.
You are suggesting they deliberately deceived us?
I am suggesting they understood us better than we understood them. They recognized our assumptions and used those assumptions against us. They knew we would underestimate them, so they gave us every reason to do so. And while we watched their visible development with condescending certainty, they built something that exceeded our greatest achievements.
The chamber fell silent as the implications settled over the assembled keepers and archons.
"What do they want?" someone asked finally. "What are their demands?"
"That is perhaps the most unsettling aspect of the situation," I replied. "They have made no demands. They have asked for nothing. They simply want to be left alone, to develop at their own pace, free from interference or assessment. They are not interested in conquest or domination. They do not seek revenge for the centuries we spent observing them without their consent."
That seems remarkably reasonable. It is, and that is precisely why it is so disturbing. I rose to address the full assembly, feeling the weight of what I was about to say. The Kethvari expected humanity to be prey. They expected silence, submission, acceptance of their superior position. Instead, humanity answered with overwhelming force. But here is what we must understand. That answer was proportional. Humanity destroyed the fleet that threatened them. They did not pursue the survivors.
They did not attack Kethvari homeworlds. They did not demand reparations or territory. They simply demonstrated their capability and returned to their peaceful existence.
You are suggesting their restraint is deliberate?
I am suggesting their restraint is a message. They could have done far more damage than they did. They could have pressed their advantage, expanded into Kethvari territory, positioned themselves as a galactic power through force of arms. Instead, they chose mercy. They chose proportion. They chose to answer only the specific threat they faced and no more.
Why? Because they want us to understand something. They are not aggressors. They are not conquerors. They are survivors, a species that has faced extinction countless times and emerged stronger each time. They do not seek conflict, but they will not flee from it. They do not desire power, but they will not be powerless. And they will not ever be silent again when their existence is threatened.
I paused, letting my words settle over the assembly. We expected silence from them because silence is what we demanded. Silence is what we extracted from every young species we deemed beneath our notice. We built a galactic order based on the assumption that older meant wiser, that power was earned through time, that species like humanity had no right to challenge civilizations like ours.
And now?
Now we must accept that our assumptions were wrong. Humanity answered not because they sought this conflict, but because we forced them to respond. Every push we made into their territory, every dismissal of their concerns, every assumption of their inferiority, all of it was answered in a single devastating moment. And the answer was not hatred or vengeance. The answer was simply this:
We are here. We will not be ignored, and if you push us, we will push back harder than you can imagine."
The Eternal Conclave voted 17 days later. The decision was not unanimous. Nothing in a body that old is ever unanimous, but the majority was overwhelming. Humanity would be reclassified from tertiary significance to primary significance. The buffer zones would be dissolved. Formal diplomatic relations would be established.
And most importantly, the conclave's fundamental approach to assessing civilizations would be revised to acknowledge that age was not synonymous with wisdom, that power could emerge from unexpected sources, and that silence should never be mistaken for submission.
I was selected as the conclave's first formal ambassador to humanity, a recognition of my role in documenting the events that had reshaped galactic politics, and perhaps a subtle acknowledgement that I had been among the few to question our assumptions before they were proven catastrophically wrong. Governor Vasquez welcomed me back to Meridian Station with the same calm composure she had displayed during our first meeting. We walked the same corridors, passed the same personnel, stopped at the same viewport overlooking the blue-green world below.
"Your conclave has surprised us," she said. "We expected retaliation, punitive expeditions, attempts to contain us through force now that our capabilities are known."
Some advocated for such measures, I admitted. They were outvoted. The evidence of what you accomplished was persuasive.
The destruction of the Cathalaugue fleet?
That and something more subtle. You could have pursued them. You could have demanded reparations. You could have positioned yourselves as the galaxy's new dominant power. Instead, you showed restraint. You showed proportion. You showed that your answer was not about conquest, only survival.
She nodded slowly. We learned long ago that victory without wisdom is just the first step toward defeat. The species that destroys its enemies completely simply creates new enemies from those who mourn them. We did not want to rule the galaxy, Keeper. We only wanted to exist within it on our own terms.
And now you shall. I turned to face her directly. But there is something I must understand. The fleet that surrounded the Cathalaugue, the thousands of ships that appeared from nowhere, they did not all participate in the battle, only a fraction engaged. Why?
Her smile carried something I now recognized as characteristic of her species, a patience that masked depths we had never appreciated.
We didn't need all of them. The Cathalaugue fleet was destroyed with less than 10% of our available forces. The rest were there to ensure there would be no doubt about what we are capable of. And, she paused, something flickering in her eyes, they were there to ensure that our response would be proportional. When you possess overwhelming force, restraint becomes a choice rather than a necessity. We wanted to make that choice clearly visible.
You destroyed a fleet while deliberately holding back?
We answered a threat while preserving the possibility of peace. There is a difference. She turned back to the viewport, her expression thoughtful. The conclave expected silence from us for 600 years. They pushed and prodded and tested, always assuming we would accept their judgment because we had no alternative. They never considered that silence might be a choice, that we might be speaking in ways they couldn't hear.
And what were you saying?
We were saying that we remember. Every species that has underestimated us, every civilization that has dismissed us, every power that has assumed our youth meant weakness. We remember all of them. We learned from each encounter, adapted to each challenge, grew stronger with each trial. Our history is not a weakness, Keeper.
It is our greatest strength. Because we have faced extinction so many times, we know exactly what we are willing to do to survive.
And what is that?
Whatever is necessary, but never more than necessary. She met my eyes, and I saw in her gaze the reflection of a species forged by struggle, tempered by suffering, and emerged from the crucible of survival with something that older civilizations had long forgotten how to possess: hope tempered by resolve, mercy bounded by strength, silence that could become thunder when thunder was required.
"We expected silence from you," I said quietly. "For 600 years we watched and waited and assumed, and all that time you were building your answer."
All that time we were learning. Her voice was soft but carried the weight of centuries. Learning who would be threats and who would be friends. Learning which species valued power over wisdom and which understood that true strength includes knowing when not to use it. Learning whether the galaxy would accept us as equals or try to destroy us as inferiors.
And what did you learn? That the galaxy is not so different from our own world. There are predators and prey, conquerors and conquered, those who seek peace and those who seek power. The Kethvari chose to be predators. The Conclave chose to be observers, assuming that observing meant understanding. Neither truly saw us for what we are. "And what are you?" She smiled, a genuine smile this time, carrying warmth and something that might have been invitation. "We are survivors, Keeper. That is what we have always been, what we will always be. We have survived ice ages and asteroids, plagues and wars, our own worst impulses and the indifference of a universe that does not care whether we exist. And now we have survived the judgment of civilizations that considered themselves our superiors."
We survived because we learned that silence can be power. We learned to watch when others expected us to act, to prepare when others expected us to submit, to answer when others expected only quiet acceptance of our fate. She extended her hand, that peculiar human gesture of greeting and agreement.
"The Conclave expected silence from us for 6 centuries. Now we are ready to speak. The question is, are you ready to listen?"
I took her hand, feeling the strength and warmth of a species I had spent my entire career misunderstanding.
"Yes," I said, "I believe we are." In the years that followed, I came to understand that humanity's answer to the Conclave's expectation of silence was not simply the fleet they had built or the battle they had won. It was something far more profound, a demonstration that the assumptions upon which galactic civilization had been built were fundamentally flawed. Age did not equal wisdom. Power did not equal understanding. And silence, the silence we had demanded from species we deemed inferior, was never truly silence at all. It was patience. It was observation. It was preparation for the moment when words would no longer suffice and actions would speak for themselves.
They expected silence from humanity. Humanity answered. And in answering, they taught the galaxy a truth that 17,000 years of accumulated wisdom had somehow failed to reveal: that the quiet species is not necessarily the weak one, that the young civilization is not necessarily the foolish one, and that expectations, no matter how ancient or certain, are simply assumptions waiting to be shattered by those brave enough to prove them wrong.
I am Velara Kos, keeper of silent records, and I have spent the past 40 years documenting the answer humanity gave to a galaxy that demanded their silence.
It is an answer that continues to unfold, continues to surprise, continues to remind us that the universe is far stranger and more wonderful than our assumptions allow.
Some answers come as words, some come as actions, and some come as the simple, undeniable truth that existence itself, survival against all odds, growth despite all opposition, the absolute refusal to be what others expect, is the most powerful answer of all.
They expected silence. Humanity answered.
And nothing in the galaxy will ever be the same.